Now it's time to bring in our web browser control. The web browser control was introduced in Visual Studio 2005. It allows you to use a Windows Forms as a container for a browser. Why would you want to do this? One good example is for managing state. For example, let's say a user makes changes to a web application. Traditionally, it's difficult to manage the state. If the user abruptly closes the browser window, all the changes will be lost. That's not the case if you use a desktop application as your container. You can control what buttons the user can see, and you can hide back, next, and close functionality from the user. Another good reason to use it is to take advantage of browser features, such as Internet Explorer's ability to show an XML document as a collapsible and expandable hierarchy. Let's go ahead and use the web browser control. Scroll down until the bottom panel is in view. From the left-hand side in your toolbox, scroll down until you see the web browser control. The web browser control uses a subset of Internet Explorer functionality. It has almost all the functionality that IE has, including the ability to render JavaScript and images, but it's not as robust, nor does it consume as much memory as a full-blown version of Internet Explorer. Let's configure the properties. On the right-hand side in your Properties window, change the name to be Web Browser Research. The web browser should automatically dock in the panel. If it doesn't, you can do so by setting the dock property to fill. Let's set the URL for default to be the blank URL. In the URL property, type in about:blank. Now let's customize our browser. The first thing we'll need to do is write some code to refresh the browser based on changes that the user makes to the user interface. For example, should the user type in an address, you'd want to navigate the browser to the address that the user entered. Likewise, for searching, you want to directly take the user to the results of their search rather than to a default search engine. This is easy enough to do. Press F7 to navigate into the code behind file. Let's create a new subroutine called Refresh Research Browser. As a best practice, you always want to first add exception handling. Add in a try-catch finally block. After the catch, add a finally clause. The finally clause allows you to clean up any resources or take any action upon success, whereas the catch block allows you to handle any type of exceptions. You can have one or many catch blocks to handle different types of exceptions. For a generic exception, you might have a generic handler, but for specific exceptions, such as the network being down, you may want to give the user a different type of message. Above the try, let's go ahead and declare an internal variable. We'll call it _search, and the type will be string. Inside the catch block, let's handle a generic exception. You remember in a previous chapter, we created a centralized status messaging source that would automatically write status of the application directly to the status strip control. That way the user would not see any annoying dialog box or pop-up windows to interfere with their work, yet still be able to get status about the application, whether an error occurred or whether successful conditions were met, such as an item being successfully saved. Let's go ahead and use that method to write a status message to our form. Type in WR and from the drop-down select Write Status Message. Inside, indicate an error has occurred by typing in error when refreshing browser. Inside the try, we'll want to configure the web browser to return the results of the search that the user conducted, whether it's a live search or whether it's a wiki. It's easy enough to determine how to configure this by analyzing the query string that you see in the address pane when you actually go to a browser to conduct searches. Just copy that query string and feed it the data from your text box. We'll do this both for live and for the wiki. Inside the try, set the internal search variable to capture the search request from the user. Type in search and set this equal to a trimmed version, Trim allows you to take off any leading spaces before and after the criteria and is a good practice so you only pass in relevant data to a particular web browser or web service. And inside the trim, pass in a string, which will be the text box search research.text. Now let's add some if-then logic to understand whether this user is searching on Live or Wikipedia. Type in if radio button live.checked equals true, then we'll navigate to the Live search engine. Type in web browser research.navigate. The navigate method allows you to go directly to a property, and notice by hitting IntelliSense, you can actually work with other properties, such as go home, go forward, or go back. Or you can choose not to use any of these properties and limit the user's interaction with the browser. Select Navigate, and now let's go ahead and add a new URI, which is a Uniform Resource Indicator, to actually indicate the URL for the website that we wish to browse to. Type in new system.uri. The new URI could expect a string, or it has 6 other overloaded instances that allows you to add additional criteria, whether it's escape or relativity clauses, to your URI. By default, we'll use the simplest one, which is only expecting a string. This string is the actual address for the URL you wish to use. Type in http://search.live.com/results.aspx. The question mark and the Q after ASPX is what's called a query string. This allows you to pass variables into a web URL. In this case, we're going to pass in the value for the Q variable, which is the query that we're wishing to search upon. Close with a double quote and add the criteria that's located inside of our internal variable, search. And close the parentheses for the URL as well as the navigate method. We'll be doing something similar for the second option. Type in else if radio button wiki.checks equals true, and go ahead and copy the code that we just typed inside of our else if and change the URL to be en.wikipedia.org/wiki. This URL doesn't use query strings, and instead it uses the virtual directory representation for the search criteria. And now, in our finally clause, let's add some closing logic. Type in write status message, done, indicating everything occurred successfully. Scroll down outside the subroutine. Now we're going to add a validated event for the text box control. This means that after the user is done typing their search criteria, you're going to refresh the browser. That way, the user doesn't have to do anything but just type in their search criteria. The drop-down menu at the top left-hand side allows you to peruse all the different controls that you have on your form. From this drop-down list, select the text box Search Research. Once you select a control, the scope of the second drop-down list on the right-hand side allows you to choose from all the events that belong to that particular control. So in this case, we see all the events that belong to text box Search Research. Scroll down until you see the validated event. The validated event fires after the user has finished typing their information. Select this, and now this will automatically create an event delegate for us for the validated event. Let's go ahead and add some logic. Because we created a subroutine to refresh the browser, we can call that subroutine from a variety of different sources using that logic by only typing in one line of code. Subroutines make it useful for you to reuse pieces of logic over and over again. Let's go ahead and add this line of code, but first, let's add a try-catch block. Inside of this, call the refresh research browser method. Next, we'll add some logic for our radio buttons. Hit Shift F7 to go back to the design view. Double-click on the radio button. Inside the radio button, add some try-catch logic and also refresh the browser. And do the same for the Wiki radio button. And the last thing we'll need to do is configure the feature for the address. That way, when the user types in an address, the browser will automatically refresh. Go back to the design view and double-click on the Go button. Add a try-catch handler, and inside of the try, type in webbrowserresearch.url to set the URL to the text that the user enters in the address bar. Now let's add some logic to capture the events of the browser itself. From the drop-down list at the top, select the Web Browser Research, and for its event, select Document Completed. Once the information in the browser has finished loading, the Document Completed event will fire. Add a try-catch block, and inside of that, write a status message to indicate that the browser has finished loading. We'll also want to add some logic for the navigating event. Select Web Browser Research from the drop-down list. Select the navigating event. Notice any event that's been wired, such as the document completed, will be highlighted in bold. Select the navigating event, add a try-catch block, and go ahead and write a status message indicating that the browser is still loading. That's it. We've configured our search functionality.